I'd like to thank our top sponsor, Dean Anthony, for making this show possible. And welcome to the Cave of Apelles. Tonight we will take a look at how poetry can give us grand stories. We will explore the virtues of different meters and how rhyme and strict form can create archetypical images. Not the least, can poems educate us, and is there such a thing as masculine storytelling? Thomas Løland, welcome to the Cave of Apelles.
My pleasure.
So you are basically quite new to writing poetry.
Yes.
You want to give us some intro to when you started and why on earth would you start to write poems?
So basically I started one year ago, last year, when COVID struck. I found myself with much time on my hand, to say the least. I always had this idea that I wanted to write a novel, but I never wrote anything. So it's just ideas, so it's nothing. But I viewed poetry as sort of a gateway into starting to write something. And I tried it, and it gave me a lot of satisfaction. So yeah, that is basically the origin of my poetry adventure.
There you see how destructive the lockdown can be.
Yes. I mean, I thought when all this lockdown, I thought, well, people are complaining too much. They could do something constructive.
That's great. Right.
So I did it.
Yeah, but you're a sensible guy as well. I mean, you're actually getting an education so you can survive in addition to being a poet.
Yes, you know, it's not very popular to write poetry, at least not the way I'm writing poetry, in verse and in meter and rhymes and everything. It's kind of out of fashion, and I think that's very sad, because it's so beautiful.
So we should mention the poem I wanted to really start talking about is quite a long poem, and I think it was inspired by this painting, wasn't it? By Luke Hillestad.
Yes. So I wrote a quite long poem, 13 stanzas, that I sent in to a competition at the Sivilisasjonen, poetry competition, classical poetry competition. And I saw this painting a short while before that, and I thought it was very magical, the way he kind of makes like the fur glimmering with gold, so it makes it mythological, and also there's kind of this subtle drama in this painting, the way that you can see one of the hooves is lifted up, so it's prepared to run away, to scatter away. And I think everyone can recognize this feeling when you walk in the forest and you see a deer, and you get like this moment of almost like a transcendent feeling when you meet a deer and you look straight into its eyes, and then it just scatters away. So you forget everything for a short moment. So that was my inspiration for the poem, which centers around this white doe. So in my poem it's a female deer, not a stag. And basically the poem is about a guy that sets out on adventure to pursue happiness and ambition. And but then he has a strange dream, which he dreams about a white doe that comes to him, and then it's revealed that he sees the soul of his beloved that he left behind in this doe, and that sets in motion a lot of feelings that he had suppressed, and he doesn't feel at home in the country he's in because it's far, far away. So now he has this almost like emotional breakdown over this.
Yeah. Well, that first off, that reminds me a little bit of certain folk songs or folk stories, where you have this, it's at least one recurring theme. This young man that goes out, for ambition, sake of ambition, to win these great things, and then he comes back, and then things are lost, or he doesn't come back, right?
Yeah.
And I think, that's maybe touching a bit on the whole masculine tendency in how you write. I mean, this masculine drive to conquer and become some kind of a king, and then returning and being deserving the woman that he left.
Yes.
And I think it's when I read your poem, and it was really a fantastic experience where you read something, and it's not just, oh, here's a poem in rhyme, but it grabs you. And I was thinking about something that Aftur Nerdrum said, which was so funny, that the how is it phrased? The signifier of a good story is that you wish it was a bad story, because you wish he would just leave everything and then go back to her, and they found each other again and had a family and everything was fine. There was no problems. So why on earth doesn't he go home?
Yes.
And I think that has occupied me so much. Of course, there are different ways to create the story within different disciplines, from what you do and what Luke Hillestad is doing in painting. But basically, as I see it, there are just doors into different doors into the same mythical room or eternal perspective or whatever.
Yes, and what you touched upon with you just want him to go back. Why is he not going back?
Yeah,
it seems like this simple thing, and that was actually something that I thought so deeply about, because I had to make him have reasons to not go back.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the whole plot was really the most difficult thing, because I was making a story, and you have to have an action to make a story, and it has to be continuous. It has to be the viewer has to, or the reader has to follow with the story, and I thought that was very hard. So that was my main concern with writing the story, that it was actually interesting to read.
But how specifically concrete? Because I would really want to talk to you about that. Concrete, so it's not just something mystical, inspiration, these things, but like concrete. How do you actually create and forge this poem? Like, how did you begin? Because I can add some stuff after you've said how you begin.
Yes, so I had some complications, because I thought when I was going to sign up for the competition, I thought, well, why don't I write a story out of 3 sonnets I already have? So basically I tried to, because the first sonnet I have is the very first one, and that is almost like a short story in itself. And so I thought, okay, I can make a story out of this, and I had the story in my head, and I knew almost exactly how long it was going to be. But I think I said 10 sonnet stanzas, but it turned out to be 13, so quite a bit longer. And then I needed some problems that he had to face, and also I wanted to integrate this White Doe.
Yeah, because when you start like that, that must be a big challenge.
Definitely.
I haven't been writing poems, but like essays or articles or whatever. And I read this book based on the lectures by Ayn Rand, The Art of Nonfiction, and she talks about pet sentences. The sentence you really want to have in there, and you stick to it. It doesn't match, but you want it there, and then it destroys the sort of the flow of in the article in that case. That could easily become something like that. Like you want that deer in there, but it might not fit.
Yes, and that's and another problem is when you write in such a strict form, You have to have the progression has to be there, but you have to have all the rhymes. Everything must fit. So it's like a puzzle piece. And of course you can't go on with the same things for many lines. Then it's just unnecessary. So you have to have the progression, and you have to have like all the things you want to fit that makes the story interesting. You need to like gradually come into it. It's the same with like Aristotle says in Poetics, that if something happens, it must be of probable cause or necessity.
Yeah.
So or else
and
you
that
lose the
something
audience.
else happens because of what has gone before.
Yes, exactly.
Right. So so the Poetics, you be concerned with that?
Yes, I read the Poetics, but I didn't read it before after I wrote the poem, actually.
Okay.
So I followed you could say I followed my instincts or whatever, but I think, you just build up from what you have seen of good stories, you build up a kind of database or something of knowledge.
Yeah.
So I wish I had read it before. I think I could make improvements, but yeah.
But so, okay, you had those 3 sonnets, and you sort of laid them out in some kind of progression, but you had to adjust and find something to bind them together.
Yes.
So did you then just write down these things are going to happen, like the pure structure, before you at all thought about adding verses or changing?
Oh, I didn't. I actually didn't sketch it down.
Okay.
I thought about it in my head, so I had a rough idea.
Okay.
And then, of course, it's a lot of work to write the sonnet stanzas. So some things you figure out while you're going, kind of. You have to be. I mean, you have the rough idea, and then you have to be concerned about how can I get there? What am I doing right now? So I had a lot of time to think about the plot while working on it, but I'm not sure if this is the best idea to start out like this. But
yeah, but I mean, it's like you've been writing for a year.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think you can be forgiven for that.
Yeah, thank you.
But there's one thing that I noticed. I mean, I was reading through it and I tried to sort of analyze how you structure it. And one thing that I noticed already, I mean, I have it here. One thing that you're basically doing when this man goes out, gets a lot of gold and these things, but then he has this yearning for home, and for her. And you're basically laying that out, the whole essence of the story, already in the first stanza.
Yes.
And I find that fascinating, and that because there's, you have these things about things being hidden, like in between the words, under the lines, undertext is what you call it. But you do sometimes here, and I see also Ibsen does it, where things become extremely clear, like almost in your face clear, but somehow you manage to hide it so it doesn't sort of give the whole thing away. Because I think when you do that in the beginning, you sort of sketch out what the story is about. So we've heard it once already, and then when you go more into detail about it, it's something we heard before, so it can sort of hit us harder.
Yes.
Were you conscious about that, or?
I think some of it was because I had already the first sonnet as a sonnet. Maybe not the best sonnet in and of itself, but yeah. So I'm quite explicit in the first sonnet, like he's telling us very clearly that he feels a longing for home. Yeah. And but I thought, well, I wanted the story to develop through his thoughts, so that like gradually things are revealed. So we only see the surface first, and then you get the story behind it, and then you get all the intricacies with all the emotions. Yeah. So he goes on, and it's not only he feels great anger also. Yeah. Eventually,
because there's all in those 3 first stanzas. What do you call that when you there's a term for it. Anyway, you go gradually down, sort of land in his. I envision some kind of a library where that tiger skin is lying.
Yes.
And how he's gotten all that. Yeah. That's in the very beginning. This is a beautiful image, where it says that he created a bow made of silver, and then shot his arrow and found gold.
Mm-hmm.
So he sort of goes up one level, but then it's the longing back home.
Yes.
So you all the time, he describes these things that he has and the riches that he has, but it doesn't fulfill him.
Yes.
And even that's a beautiful thing. Speaking of animation, like it's concrete, how you actually craft the poem. That tiger skin lying there, grinning at him.
Yes.
And
exactly.
Of course, you understand this is what they call projection in psychology, right?
Yes. Yes.
But that's an animation of that, putting him basically, or making the tiger alive, so to speak. But then, of course, with his ideas or his soul, so to speak.
Yes, because he goes through and he says, "Oh, I have so fine things here," and then he looks at the tiger skin, which of course is a dead animal, but it has like a expression on his face, and then as you say, he's projecting his feelings, and it seems like it's laughing of him, because of course he's trying to rescue himself in sort of a way that is like, "Oh, I have so fine things, why do I care about this? Why do I want to go home?" And yeah, that's quite revealing, and I wanted to be the person to be kind of complex in that way, or that it's not only, "Oh, I want to go back, I'm so sad," but that is like an emotional specter that is revealed.
I think we can really dwell on that poem, because this is a really good vantage point for a lot of those specific tools of the storytelling in poem. And one thing it's in Norwegian, so I just have to try to translate somehow. You describe a situation where he is sitting high up in a tower, but then he feels this chain and this what do you call it, anchor.
Yes.
That is just, it hasn't let go.
Mm-hmm.
Even though it's high up there, you get this. You sort of use a metaphor which is a double metaphor, because there's a distance in space from up there where he is now and down there, which is, socially speaking, where he wants to be.
Yes.
Basically with her, but also a space in time.
A space in time and place.
Yeah.
So he
when
feels
like
this
like distance in yards, but also in time.
Yeah, I wanted to really underscore that point, that it's far away.
Yeah.
So you have the distance. So he feels quite estranged in this other country. And I like I like playing with words, like double metaphors and stuff like that. But of course, if you don't do it consistently, it's just absurd, because then you confuse the reader. Yeah. So then both metaphors have to give sense.
Right. That reminds me of, I sent you that, and I'm going to mention that 3,000 times more in future conversations. A story by Robert McKee. And he talks about that. Of course, he bases himself very much on poetics, so it's sort of fascinating how things go together here. How you can have an absurd world or surreal world, but it has to be logically consistent. Of course, then he's talking about action, but you're sort of talking about the same thing then when it comes to the tools you use as a poet.
Yes.
That you can. Is it the same? I'm just trying to relate to it. Like if I make a painting and there's something red here and it's all alone, that might seem strange. But if I repeat it some places, then it belongs to the painting because it's echoed different places in the same painting.
Yes.
Is it something like that you're talking about? Or?
Well, almost. It's I would say it's like if you want a metaphor, and then you have maybe you have some lines previously or whatever, and then you want like the metaphor, like a double metaphor. So it can have two meanings. but then the both meanings has to be consistent, so that the reader doesn't get confused. What is he talking about now?
Yeah.
Because then they think, oh, is it this or is it that? But of course, you know, some critics like to do this, where they just take everything apart and then they want to find hidden meanings. But you shouldn't distract the reader with stuff like that. But I like if I can make things mean two different things, two different metaphors in one metaphor, and both are consistent and both make sense to the story, I think it's fine.
There's another thing that you do, and I've seen that in some other poems that you've written as well, that you, and I was just struck by it because it's, you know, there's something I remember I was together with Aftur Nerdrum once, and he was doing lithography. I'll get to the point, just sort of a bit of a detour.
Yeah, sure.
And of course, then you draw with you can with ink or with a pencil, whatever, which has fat in it. That's the point. So of course, if you lean your hand on the stone, that can make ugly marks. Sometimes it's on the, it comes into the print, right? And it's not supposed to be there. And you cannot scrape in it, because if you draw over it, suddenly there's a line there still, but you think you've covered it and stuff like that. And I looked at how he was working, and he was doing all the things that you shouldn't do. And I said, well, you're not supposed to do that. And he said, well, it's just that if you do exactly what you're supposed to do, it doesn't become that good. Of course, he's not talking about some modernist idea, just break all rules or whatever, but I mean, there's something about, if you know form, the meters that we'll get to sort of more specifically, you can sort of start dancing around with it, I guess.
Yes, certainly. You can have as much fun as you want, as long as you as long as you make it clear to the reader that this is what I'm showing you. I'm not just placing an object and then telling you, okay, show me what it means.
I noticed one thing that, in a way, annoyed me a bit in the beginning when I noticed that you did. You can write a full sentence, which is logical and grammatically consistent, but it's like you often what you do is that you have that sentence, but then you take out the sort of the less necessary words and just cram it together. So it's kind of, I guess, the same in some way, the same phenomenon as when you take out some consonants in a word, and you still recognize the word although some letters are missing.
Yes.
And that fascinated me, how you can, like, it's not logical or realistic in the language. I don't know how to describe it. I don't know. Do you want to defend yourself?
Well, I have to, right? Well, it makes it, some of it is because you have to fit it to the form. Yeah. And then you think, okay, can I do this?
Pause right there. I mean, fit to the form, how? Is that a question of syllables or?
Yes, the question of syllables.
Yeah.
The meter of the sonnet, in this case, because you have to have 10 syllables each line, and you have to have 14 lines, and then it's the iambic pentameter, which starts off with a unstressed syllable, and then a stressed one, and then you have 10 syllables. Follows this pattern. So that is always kind of a challenge to make it fit. And then at one point you go, well, can I do it like this? I mean, it gets denser if what you are describing, and then you go through it kind of, and you feel like, okay, it doesn't lose any meaning. It gives it kind of like a strangeness, kind of like this poetic form. And then you go, okay, I guess it's okay. It's I can get away with it.
Well, you do. I mean, I noticed it, but I forgive you. I mean, and I was thinking that this again is something that Aristotle talks about. I guess I see a parallel, at least.
He talks about the strangeness, about using strange words that are not common, for example. Okay. So poetry is like lifted over the commonplace. Right. So if you, for example, you use another word for horse that are not very common, then it gets lifted over the commonplace, because it's not common speech, but it's something poetical. And this is of course the same thing with metaphors, and also you can allow some degree of changing the syntax in a sentence. I think I've done it some places. But if you do it all the time, it's quite revealing, because then it's like it's poor craft.
Right.
Because then you just do it just to make it rhyme or fit into the form.
Well, that's one thing too. Then I think also a parallel to classical figurative painting would be that something that I'm really concerned with, that it's not enough to get the proportions and the colors and the values to be correct.
Yes.
Because if that's the only thing, there's no story there. And I guess that struck me, and I want to get to comparing this, that you write in rhyme with what you see in that Egil Skallagrimsson's poem in the Icelandic saga, Loss of Sons, where he doesn't use rhyme. That I guess a poet who shall be classical can be blinded by that it has to be rhyme. That rhyme is sort of the goal of the like that's the purpose of writing a poem.
Yes. And of course rhyme,
because that's the classical, that's the old-fashioned and whatever.
Yes, and then you have the skaldic tradition, which, and not only the skaldic tradition, the old Germanic tradition. They wrote in alliterative verses, no rhymes.
Which is
it's if you have a word, then the first consonant has to be the same, and then you have to have every consonant before the stressed vowel has to be the same.
Okay, and just to explain stressed vowel, what function does that have in a line then?
Yes,
there's a certain
yes
focus in the sentence, so to speak.
Yes, so the focus, if you have a word with 2 syllables, for example, you have a bottle. You can hear that the stress is on the first syllable, bottle. So stressed, unstressed syllables, that's what you count in a meter, for example. So we can say they sort of had this meter, but it was another type of meter. They weren't counting syllables that much. They were actually, but they had no rhymes. They used alliterative words instead. But they counted stressed syllables most of the time. So
that's funny that it's easy to read, for example, your poem here, and just think rhyme and not notice what you're talking about there, because you're obviously very, very concerned with those condensing the sentences for that sake that you're talking about.
Yes.
And I was thinking that one thing that struck me is that when you really compress it like that, you make images. It doesn't just become like a description and a lot of words going here and there, but it becomes an image somehow.
And that's the purpose of using all these metaphors also. You want to paint images, like you read the poem and you get it's almost like it burns on your retina. You can almost see it. It takes you on a journey. If you just explain everything, then it's boring. It gets dry. It's like it's storytelling, but it's not poetic.
Exactly, and I think so. Rhyme, together with a strict meter and awareness of syllables, and the meter. I think those two things, and metaphor, as you say, and other things we'll get to, I guess, are a way of making these things eternal. Well, that's basically what Aristotle was saying, right? If I understood you correctly. Yes,
he said that all the like the way, like the diction, the way you write the poetry, lifts it above the commonplace, and yes, it makes it eternal in a sense. Yes, because it's not only it's not only straightforward, but it kind of gives the words, I would like to say, it gives the words wings in some sort of sense. But he also says that you have to do it with moderation.
Right, of course.
Because if you don't do it with moderation, it's too airy.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
too airy.
I guess it's the same thing as if you work on a painting and things are obviously composed, placed here because that fits with this. And I think if you do that, you notice the composition, the sort of the rhythm, pure rhythm, or what you want to say, and not how it combines the figures into an action. I mean, if you look at Caravaggio, Martyrdom of Matthew, if you start analyzing it, you see there's a clear rhythm that binds all of them together and makes them part of this drama going on there, right?
Yes, so you don't lose the story, right? But if you had too many things going on, you can lose the story. Your gaze can wander off in strange directions, if you don't take this into account. And that is the same with poetry. And if you only if you abstract too much with these metaphors, you it gets too airy. You lose your ground.
Yeah.
So
it has to be realistic. The action has to be realistic.
Yes,
somehow.
You lose the story.
Yeah.
Because then you're too caught up in just words.
Yeah. But there's what do you think of, or do you have any ideas about what Aristotle is talking about, this thing of changing of the character from one thing to another? I mean, as I understand your poem, you have this man who longs for what he had, when he didn't have wealth. But then there's the allure of the wealth, and also he starts talking about, that sounds a bit like rationalizing his choice, that he has a responsibility for the people who work for him, and he cannot just leave it all, and will she think the same now as she did, and all these things. And he ends up just, it's a very open ending, I guess, but you understand that he's not going back because he's sort of stuck in that situation. And in a way, it reminded me of an experience I had when I read, I guess the English title is The Player by Dostoevsky. He gets caught up in that, in gambling, and he has this girl who's waiting for him, and I'll marry her, but just one last game, one last victory. And I turned the page, and the book was over. And it was such a shock to me that he didn't go for her, but was just caught up in this. And I guess that's also sort of slightly touching on if poetry has some kind of educational value, not like didactic, obviously, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, poetry is not supposed to convey historical facts, but it's supposed to, like these are the facts, this is what happened. It's supposed to convey truths. And if you convey natural truths, then you have to show something universal. So by reading poetry or by viewing great masterpieces, paintings, for example, you can gain deep knowledge into nature without it being like hyper realistic, because that would be more akin to writing history, kind of.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, this is the way it is.
Exactly. Yeah.
But you get, it's a metaphor for life, and you can get a great sense of relief from your troubles by ways of catharsis, for example. So you can overcome yourself in sort of a sense. You can affirm life by reading great poetry.
I think then you get sort of it's very cheap and vulgar to phrase it like that, but you sort of get free experience somehow. I mean, of course.
Yes, exactly.
But you have to be able to recognize the same pattern, because it never happens exactly like in your poem or in something else. So you sort of have to be able to transfer what you've learned to your own life, obviously. But because I'm thinking about that, like what you're left with reading your poem here, and suddenly it struck me that you are, well, we're both imitating when I paint or when you write, imitating human action somehow. and you are imitating it, of course, in a poetic way, so it's not a literal action as in a novel necessarily. But there's that level, but there's also the level of imitating his psychology, like how he unconsciously reveals what he actually values. Because I noticed that the few, I guess two stanzas that are, or especially one, which is very, very sensual, about her. You know, all this gold or that tiger skin is not devoted that much love and that much attention as you do, as he does when it comes to her. So it's it's a very strange situation that, and I think it's that's, I guess, it's one thing you can take away from it, that, you know, not getting caught up in this social success, so that you actually leave what you actually love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a lot of things you can take from it in that sense. It sort of embodies this masculine drive to work hard and to be something more than you already are. Yeah. And of course, the success, the goal, the glimmer, all that stuff. But that is only material. And that's kind of a cliche, you know. But at the same time, it has to be a balance. And of course, this guy is he says that he never thought about her before his dream. Kind of maybe an over exaggeration, but maybe it's the type of guy he is. And so.
And I mean, you do that because that's another thing, that sort of tool that you use after that. Incredibly very sort of Hellenistic in the sensuality, that description of her. Then he starts describing all those greedy, dirty bastards that he's surrounded with. Yes. And how he hates that, and they hate him, but has some responsibility for them. And to juxtapose images like that. I mean, this is really, well, speaking of screenwriting, this is what Blake Snyder talks about in Save the Cat. How do you make the good guy good? You make the bad guy badder, but it's within his own soul. Right?
Yes. Of course, I had to have the contrast, so that there's actually something going on where he wants to be in another place, and it's so far removed from where he is now, and that creates the drama. Or else it would be like just this, I miss her, but it's fine here also. It's no drama. So, yeah.
But that's one example also of animation. Then you do that. You understand that he cannot get out of it because he's still stuck with that material wealth. But he sees her everywhere at the same time. Like when he even sees, I was going to say stag, but sees a deer on the sky, and how the arrow is shot at it, and then how, and that's really playing a high game when you are writing. How is it? How you are? Well, that's the question of animation. You're talking about his tears. As sort of
like needles,
and sharp pearls, and needles that hit his hand. I think that, such a thing and that's a type of metaphor that really easily could go wrong.
Yes, it could.
Yeah,
I wanted to
and it doesn't. But it definitely playing a high game there.
Yeah, I was considering this when I wrote it. I'm my own harshest critic, so I think about all this stuff while writing all the time. So I think, can I do this? Is it too much? But I thought the imagery was very compelling, because his hand is like clenched, his fist. On a piece of paper that is revealed that he has written. So I thought it was like, and this is a guy that maybe doesn't cry that much, so it's like the feeling of, this is like needles hitting my hand. I thought I got away with it in this case.
You did. Yeah. And it's also it's interesting how also when you write classical poetry, or you work with some kind of classical storytelling, regardless of discipline, you cannot regard originality as as a virtue. I mean, per definition. Because I mean, when I read what you wrote, I think of, as I mentioned, the play by Dostoevsky, or I'm thinking about Onegin, Eugene Onegin, and the fact that he, it's a bit different story, of course, but that he rejects what could be the love of his life, and then he sort of condemns himself to wander the rest of his existence just alone.
Yes.
And then you, after having read that, you think it's like, oh my God, I do not ever want to experience that.
Yes, yes.
But maybe we should talk a little bit about the sonnet, because that's basically what you sort of most of what you write, or?
Yes, I almost exclusively write sonnets. I have a very long poem I'm writing, and that's not the sonnet, but it's in ottava rima, and that
Which
is
means?
well, it's 8 lines, and it follows iambic pentameter, but usually it's 11 syllables instead.
And what is iambic pentameter?
Iambic pentameter. Well, the iambic is the kind of the heartbeat rhythm. It's one unstressed syllable and then one stressed syllable, and penta means 5, so that's 1 foot, and you have 5 of these feet in one line. So it's unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, and it's a very smooth kind of silky rhythm. Sounds very good, like very pleasing. And actually Aristotle mentions that this iambic meter is the most closely related to how we speak normally. So
that reminds me also of something Ibsen said, because he of course he's written a lot of poems and in rhyme, with rhyme. But then he talks about at some point when he really devotes his time to just writing plays. I don't remember the phrasing, but it's something that, you know, writing normal language is the most difficult poetry you can do. And it's a fascinating thing, because I'm not by that implying some kind of modernist credo or whatever, but because it still is a question of imitating life. And rhyme is one way of doing it. That we get a sense of rhythm, which is something we enjoy, but also the rhythm of the actual language.
Yes. I mean, it's yeah, of course, because if you just cram words together and they don't sound good, it's like it's like friction between the words. That's no good, right? Every poet, regardless if you use a meter, it has to sound good. It can't be just anything. So, but a meter guarantees it. If you follow a meter, it guarantees the certain rhythm. And of course, there's different meters. So, for example, the hexameter, which is often used in epic poetry, that's like Aristotle describes that very stately and massive. So it fits very well to.
And what is the definition of that?
Well, it's you have it starts off with a strong syllable, and then you have a weak one, and basically you have it's kind of a little free, because you can interchange something called a spondy and a dactyl, which is 2 different feet. So, but usually the last one I think is a spondy, and yeah. So, but it's not the kind of way you would speak normally, like the iambic. It's kind of it's more forceful and more, more epic.
I was thinking about one thing then. This movie I saw about Tolkien, or Tolkien, you're supposed to say, I guess. That's not the point in itself, but there's a point where they've been to in the First World War and come back, and Tolkien asked this priest that he knows, that what does he say when he meets all these mothers who have lost their sons, and he says that something like, I quote gospel to them. That's the only thing you can do. There comes in something external which has a sort of objectivity to it, that sort of depersonifies suffering somehow. And I was just thinking about how the meters that you are describing, makes it so that it's not, I feel this right now, but you are. It appears to me that it clarifies your thoughts and your grasp of the material, whatever.
Yes,
you're talking about.
it gives it's very objective. It gives a feeling to the rhythm. So you should, if you set out to write a poem, you should think about, well, what genre is it? What are you writing about? How should it sound? And then you should adapt the meter to what you're saying. Because or else if you write an epic in iambic, and I guess it can be done, but it will sound too sing-songy, I think.
Okay, so can you say something about that? And I don't know if you could give specific examples, at least some ideas about it. If you have a certain story, you can never use that kind of meter, or like, is that okay? This is that story. Okay, it has to be that meter.
Yes. So basically, I mean, if the story is good, that's fine. The story is good, but the way in which the story is told, like you can imagine someone reading poetry for you, and he's reading this great epic story, but it starts very soft, the meter, and it goes like this instead of like being very massive. So the meter is more appropriate to the story, because of course, and this relates to reading also, but I think even more so if you listen to it, or you try to listen to it while you're reading it, because then you get a sense of well, this sounds very heavy, this sounds very hard, or this sounds very, very soft, like someone is just telling you about love, but then they're telling you about some epic character, you know.
Have you ever experienced quite simply changing the meter, or changing the story to fit the meter? Well,
I've mostly written sonnets. I've never changed the meter. I think changing the meter is something you probably shouldn't do, because then it's kind of, I mean...
Now you mean within the same poem?
Yeah, within the same poem, yeah. Well, I've tried to, well, because there's something, if you get used to a rhythm, the reader gets used to a rhythm, and then suddenly it changes, it sounds something is off. Because, well, human... It
cannot be like an intentional shock somehow, or...
Well, I think it might, but then that's very. I think that's hard. I think it's hard to do, and especially if you. I mean, I actually have this theory that you can create a wandering rhythm, but I've never tried it. It's just something I've thought up. But that if you have this set of rules and you start with one meter, let's say, and then you have, if you don't do it at too frequent intervals, you have these rules for when you can change. For example, you change one syllable from unstressed to stressed. And then as the poem goes along, if you have these rules, then maybe the reader doesn't recognize it that much. Gradually. And then at the end of the poem, so if it has a certain length, at the end of the poem you have a completely different metric, but along the way, the reader doesn't notice it.
Because you could imagine a poem where the change of meters follows the change of the character.
Exactly, and that's my thought.
Yeah.
So you can start off maybe,
fascinating.
Like you start off in the beginning, and it's very calm. You know, nothing has happened.
And that would be iambic, for example, or?
Yeah, for example, or you have like a normal story, you know, it's just like you present the character and everything, and then it progresses, and then you get like the reversal of the situation, for example, and then it's gradually more dramatic, and then maybe towards the end you have like something, like a scene of suffering, you know, and then the meter is completely different.
Yeah, because I remember looking at the score for, or it was transcription for piano actually, of La Bohème, and Puccini's opera. And it was really fascinating to see how he changes rhythm, like all the time to underbuild what is going on. You know how that whole, of course, how the whole thing starts with the music sort of runs in on scene. You know, and it's in medias res, like that. You know, but
Yes.
when you just look at it, it's you know, for every, well, I should say, line, there's an extreme variation of rhythm.
Yes,
So
exactly.
that might be underbuild what you say there.
Yes, yes. I haven't tried this, so I can't say for sure. But I believe it's possible. But maybe in many ways. But you have to make rules for it, so it doesn't. You can't just set out to do it. I think you have to look at a piece of paper and you have to write, and you have to figure out, okay, what can I do?
Yeah.
And how frequently.
There's one thing also. Now you said you read the Poetics after you wrote your poem, inspired by Luke Hillestad's painting.
Yes.
But there's one thing that I was concerned with, because I remember I read a book by Gregory David Roberts, Shantaram, and I heard from someone who met him when he was working on his second book. Apparently, and I wasn't there, so I might be mistaken, but apparently he has this line of what is sort of the naturalistic story, and then I don't know how many underlayers, but what I guess the basic one being the mythical layer of what is going on. And I want to mention one thing to me that our listeners and viewers will have heard before, this idea of that Jung has, or that I learned from reading about Jung. Your persona, your personality. Persona is that mask that the characters were using in ancient Greek in the tragedy. And how each story where there is a figure or so the protagonist or the characters, they have to have that sort of naturalistic persona, but behind that there's the archetypical image.
Yes, yes.
And I think that's what he was doing also with that, sort of laying out the whole novel, really working on it before he started writing it, as I understood it. What's your idea about that? It's
what do you mean exactly?
Is that a way of working that? How does it sound to you to work like that?
Well, I think it might work very well.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of approaches to working, and of course I haven't done this that long, so I've only done what I've done. But I definitely
that
think
is amazing.
Yeah. So I definitely think that that is an approach you can use. I think you know you have to think story, and then you have to think character, and you have to think all the things that's going to happen with the characters. Yeah, that's the most fundamental thing. You can't just write like a long poem. I mean, in a shorter poem you get more away with. You can't describe like a huge story, of course. So it's less complicated. Maybe you have like a feeling that you're expanding upon, like a sonnet, for example, where it's usually like a problem that you pose in the beginning, and then you have a volta, which is like a dramatic turn kind of, and you get to a resolution. So that's like almost like a small story, but you can't get all the character building into such a story.
So that's why that's why you could base your long poem on the sonnets in some way, that it was very condensed. So you could sort of elaborate on it when you put them together. It's easy. You just put them together.
Yes, yes. Well, you don't see like a clear dramatic turn in every stanza here, because that's not the point. I mean, it's the story.
No, but I mean, if a sonata allows you to really get a compressed view, like almost, well, then later when you're using it for a longer poem, it becomes sort of like a sketch. Yes. In some way, or can function as a sketch for.
Yes, definitely. I think it helped me to sort of develop this sense of having a shift somewhere. But also, like, since I'm using sonnets, voltas can be like the dramatic turn. It can be very useful because, of course, I need a progression for each stanza, and that was actually something I was very concerned about. I started writing this, and I have one stanza that I had to scrap. Oh yeah. And that was like the second or third stanza. Yeah. Well, it was basically almost like a little bit of his backstory. and I get into that later,
Okay.
but I had it.
Can I ask you specifically what that stanza was about?
It was basically about how he got to the place he is. And then I thought, well, this makes sense to me because I had a story in my head. So I sent it to some friends, and then I got a feedback like, it makes the imagery, it's like it's jumping too much. So the continuation wasn't there. It was too disjoint. And I still thought, I had this feeling like, well, I think it's going to work out, because I had only written like 5 stanzas, and I thought, well, you will get it eventually. But then I had to realize that I was wrong. That it was just, I read it, and I thought, well, it makes it too confusing. The reader is dropping out. It's like too much in the beginning, so it's like, okay, now it's here, what is going on? And even though it kind of makes sense later, you've lost something. Because then he has to go back and reread it and think what was going on.
I think of what Robert McKee talks about when he differs character from characterization. It's character you want, because that's action, that's something going on. Characterization is the naturalistic description of, supplying information.
Yes.
Blake Snyder has a funny way of doing that when you are referring to it in a script. If the figures say, "Oh, hi, John, you remember we met when we were both 18 years old, and we went to that football match?" It's like, okay, stop, don't,
Yes.
Because it becomes very fake, right?
Yeah, that's very fake. It's a very fake way of doing it, and so that was my main concern, creating a story.
Killing your darlings.
Yes.
In that specific case, yeah.
Yeah, in this case, yes.
But tell me how. You're working on a collection of poems now.
I'm working on a sonnet collection. When I started writing, I heard that it's very hard to write a good sonnet, and that kind of intrigued me.
That's also very masculine.
Yes. So I thought, well, if it's hard, maybe I should try it. And so I tried it, and well, the very first sonnet is out on Sivilisasjonen. The very first sonnet I wrote, and I thought, well, this wasn't that bad. I mean, this is, and I got this enormous satisfaction by doing it.
Yeah.
So I continued with sonnets, and I thought, well, it would be great if I had a collection. And I was writing a lot, and I saw it most about that. I took it almost like I was training for something bigger. So I see now that a lot of the early sonnets I wrote is not great quality, but I have around 70 sonnets, and I plan to put them together, maybe scrap some, rework some, and hopefully get a good collection eventually.
What are your ideas of being able to publish something written in rhyme and classical meter?
Well, I haven't really given it a lot of thought. I mean, I thought last summer that I was gonna send something out to publishers, but then I didn't do it, and I thought, well, I wanted to be perfect before I send something out. And of course, that's maybe not the way you're supposed to do it. But I thought, well, if I make a sonnet collection, it's going to come out anyways in some shape or form. So, I mean, I have great faith in ability to improve, to get better and better. So
you have a meritocratic view of it. So you're not committing the same mistake as your nameless protagonist in this poem, looking for social success.
No.
Just focusing on the quality of what you write.
Yes, I mean, I think almost no one is writing poetry for monetary reasons. I think that's
that would be quite
that's
weird.
stupid, right? That's not the way you do it, or the reason you do it.
It's funny to say to people that you do it because you're not supposed to say that that's what you do. But I mean, it's obviously, if that's the only goal, then you end up writing modernist poetry or whatever.
Yes, then you end up with because that's what's in fashion right now. But I'm not sure. I mean, I think the publishers, if they get a good sonnet collection on their desk, I think they should be happy. I mean, I would. And a lot of the other things they give out, it's I don't think it will last that long. I mean, there's a lot of poetry nowadays that is forgotten next year. It's the same as the previous year, and it's just...
Well, I think that's when you're talking about that, the reason why things are written, for social acceptance or to understand or grasp some kind of material. I mean, there's one thing that I noticed with... when Egil Skallagrimsson writes The Loss of Sons, Sonatorrek, he's lost 2 sons, and he does not want to eat. He just shuts himself into his sort of little chamber there, and no one dares speak to him. And there's a funny thing, that's speaking of the masculine and the feminine. So his daughter is called to him, and comes in and they ask, "Oh, have you eaten? Do you want some food?" "I will have no food. I will, after my brother and my father, who has decided to die, I will also die." And then, but she's so cunning, so she starts eating what we call seagrass. And then he asks, "So is that sort of uncomfortable?" "Yes." "Yeah, okay, I'll do it too." So to speed up the process. Oh, now they get thirsty, and she calls for some water. And of course they trick them, and they give them some milk instead, and that's sort of taking nutrition, right? And then she says, "Okay, well, we sort of blew the whole thing anyway, so why don't you just write a poem now for, to mourn your son, and then we can die afterwards," basically. Yeah. So he starts, and then it's described how after he had written that poem, then he got up and he wanted to live again. Yeah, and it's actually, I think, in the very last stanza, it's like hell has to wait, which is of course the goddess of the underworld. Yes. So it starts off with him. He says, "I can barely move my tongue. Things are so heavy," and then describes all the suffering, and his father passed away, and that he hates everyone basically. And I wish I could get revenge on the ocean because his son drowned. Oh yeah, man. It's such a heavy poem. And but also then getting back to that point of having a very strict form, and how that, as far as I see it, that makes you really grasp stuff. I mean, people should write poems just to be able to understand whatever, if you're doing math or whatever, write poems about it so we understand it. And you have that. The one line has 3 syllables, and next has 4, and then it's 3 and 4, 3 and 4. And how he can do this in a Norwegian translation, this weird thing that works at least visually, where some of those are 4 words, but then it's 1 word, but it has the same syllable. So it's things change, but the things remain the same still. Yes. There's some kind of a metaphysical idea in that. Yes, it's you have the pure numbers, but then of course it's like all the stuff on top of it where humans relate, the actual message, and of course talking about skaldic poetry, there seems to be this notion that people think, oh, it was not strict at all, but it was actually very strict. They had very strict forms. They had different kind of meters or forms, but they have something called drottkvæt, which is like considered as the most complex form they had. Okay. Because not only did they use alliteration in that, but they also had like middle rhymes in the middle of the words, and they used assonance. Middle rhymes. Yeah. So if you have a word and it's not rhyming, but in the middle of 2 words, that's like the same. It's rhyming in the middle instead of clear and bare. Okay. So and also they had in that form they had different rules for odd numbered lines and even numbered lines.
So it was highly complex, and they counted syllables and everything.
Yeah.
And there's actually one famous poem written in that form, and that was Harald III, that died at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. And it's said that he read out a poem right before the battle. And you can go online and read it. It's very good. So yeah, it was highly complex, and they had a long tradition that they followed. And they also used something called kenningar, which is like kind of like a metaphor that's very cryptic. So they had, for example, I think the battle's fire. If they used that, it meant sword.
Yeah.
So they had like almost like this huge. They made it complex in sort of a way where they had this wisdom that every poet had to learn to become a master.
Yeah.
So you couldn't just sit down and just write anything.
It seems like there's some deep knowledge here.
Yes, and knowledge was very important to them, because if you, of course, they had like the people had to appreciate it, and of course the origins of that type of poetry, it was not written down in the beginning. It was passed orally. So we had to be able to remember it, and it had to be eternal, because it has to pass the test of time naturally, right? And yeah, it's actually a funny origin story of concerning the origin of the skaldic tradition. It's actually embedded in their mythology, in the Norse mythology. So basically there was this strife, this war between the two pantheons of gods in Norse mythology. You have the Asir and the Vanir, the two pantheons. And as a peace offering, to make peace between themselves, they spat or spitted into a bowl, and they mixed their spit. And then the Asir thought, well, we don't want this peace offering to go to waste. So they created a man out of this called Kvasir, and he was the wisest man. Like he knew the answer to every question you posed him. So this man, this Kvasir, he went out to the world, wide and far, and he spread his knowledge. And then one time he visited two dwarfs, Fjalar and Galar, and Fjalar and Galar killed him. And then they drained his blood into 3 pots, and they mixed honey into these pots. And then this mixture fermented into a mead of poetry. And the people that drank this mead, either they became like a poet or a wise man. And so, of course, these dwarfs, they didn't want gods to be angry at them. So they told the Asir, they told them, oh, Kvasir, no, he just choked on his own wisdom. And yeah, and afterwards they went to... That's such a stupid thing to say, right?
That's really cheap.
Yeah, it's so cheap, so cheap. And then afterwards they went to a giant called Gilling, and they took him, they invited him to go in a boat and on a rowing trip. And then they made the boat tip, so Gilling fell out and he couldn't swim and he drowned. And they managed to get the boat up again, and they went back to Gilling's house where his wife was. And they told his wife, oh, he drowned. And then they said, oh, maybe you should go out and look at the ocean, maybe you can see Gilling. And then, so she went outside, but then they dropped a millstone onto her head. So she died also, so they killed Gilling and they killed his wife. And then, of course, Gilling's son, he was not happy about this, Suttung. And he grabbed the dwarfs, and then he took them on a rowing trip and placed them on a reef in the middle of the ocean, so they couldn't swim back. And then, of course, they pleaded for their lives, and they said, "Oh, save us, please! And if you do, you can have the mead of poetry." And he accepted this, so he got the mead of poetry. He went back to his home, and he said to his daughter Gunlod, could you watch this for me? And then of course Odin, he heard about this, and he wanted the mead of poetry back. Of course, the acid created the Kvasir.
Yeah.
So he seduced Gunlod and then slept at her place for 3 nights. For every night, he was allowed to take 1 sip out of the mead of poetry. And of course, there were 3 bowls. So each sip, he just drained 1 bowl. So he had all the mead of poetry inside of him. He turned himself into an eagle and he flew away. But then Suttung, he saw this eagle fly away. So he also turned himself into an eagle and followed suit. And then the Æsir saw Odin coming, so they put out 3 bowls for him to puke the mead into. He started puking, but then Suttung was so close, so he shitted some of the mead of poetry out, because he thought, oh, I'm going to get captured. And of course, the gods didn't want to save the mead that he shitted out. And the Norse people called this the mead for the klatreskalder, which means climbing poets. And that's like a term for someone that cheats in his craft. So they actually have embedded in their mythology that, you know, poetry is something of the gods, but if you cheat, it's the mead of poetry that got cheated out. So and in modern terms, it's almost like a rhymesmith. Someone that rhymes or says something that sounds good, but it has no substance, no wisdom at all.
No story.
No story.
Okay. Well, Thomas Løland, this has been a divine moment. I thank you for coming to the Cave of Apelles.
Thank you for having me.
I'd also like to thank our top sponsors, Fergus Ryan, Anders Berge Christensen, Alistair Blaine, Eric Lasky, Jared Fountain, Michael Irish, Sean Roberts, Stacey Evangelista, Trym Jordal, Peter Assinger, Hårek Jordal Andreasen, and Herman Borge for making this show possible. And remember, go to caveofapelles.com/subscribe and become a member and check out the benefits you get from becoming one. I'll see you next month.